I've been importing from overseas for 18 years, and today I run a 7-figure e-commerce business over at bumblebeelinens.com, selling handkerchiefs and linens. So I can tell you firsthand, because of these crazy tariffs, US sellers are definitely feeling the pain. Margins are tighter, costs are rising, and we're all trying to figure out what to do next. But what's happening inside of China's supply chain? That's the real story no one's talking about, and it's hitting harder than you think. Factories are shutting down. Orders are vanishing, and entire systems are starting to crack. So in this video, I'm breaking down why China's situation is far deeper and far more dangerous than most people realize, and what it means for US businesses like mine. But before we dive in, I just want to make one thing clear. This video isn't about politics. I'm here to walk you through the facts I've gathered so you can come to your own conclusions. And as we go deeper, you'll see why both American businesses and the global economy are heading for some painful adjustments. Now, if you've been following the headlines, you've probably heard all the usual talking points about Trump's tariffs and how China is unfazed. China's not dependent on the US anymore. They'll just replace American buyers with their own consumers. China's economy is evolving, they're moving up the value chain, they'll be just fine. Now, don't get me wrong, I am no fan of the way these tariffs were rolled out. And to be fair, there's actually some truth to each of these claims. But today, I'm going to walk you through the missing details, and when you see the full picture, it actually tells a very different story. Because once you see the real numbers behind China's export economy, you'll realize that the situation is far more fragile than anyone admits. Now, as of 2024, the United States accounted for about 14.7% of China's total exports. And this number has gone down steadily year after year because of the tariffs. Now, on the surface, 14.7% might not sound like much. You might think that China could easily absorb that kind of loss. But here's what most people miss. A massive shift in production already happened behind the scenes a while back. During the first Trump administration, thousands of Chinese factories moved parts of their operations to Vietnam, Mexico, Thailand, and other countries, not because they wanted to, but because they had to survive the tariffs. And when you add up the Chinese products sneaking through third country assembly lines, mainly through Vietnam and Mexico, plus the flood of direct-to-consumer de minimis parcels that aren't even counted properly, the real number tells a different story. If you take into account all of China's tariff avoidance tactics, the US market still absorbs about 22 to 25% of the value of everything China ships out. And that is roughly one export dollar for every 4. So while China's official export numbers to the US have dropped, the business itself didn't disappear. It just got rerouted through other countries. And at the end of the day, China is still heavily dependent on the US consumer. They're just hiding it better now. And if you think that losing a quarter of your economy is something you can shrug off, just wait until you see how it's rippling through China's factories right now. Now, another argument I hear all the time is that China's massive population will let them simply absorb the losses through domestic sales. But the numbers paint a very different picture. And it's not just about the math. It's about a completely different mindset that makes recovery even harder. Now, the United States is still the largest economy and the largest consumer market in the world, spending $19.5 trillion every year. In comparison, China is forecasted to consume only about $5.9 trillion. And these numbers blew my mind when I first saw them, but did you know that the US alone accounts for nearly 30% of the global personal consumption? And based on the numbers, Americans consume at least 3x more than China overall, despite China having nearly 3 times the population. And when you factor in the population, the gap gets even wider. The average American consumes 4 to 9 times more than the average Chinese citizen, depending how you measure it.
There's a big difference between American consumption because people say, well, the economy is bad, so China consumption will be good low. No, totally different. You Americans love to spend tomorrow's money. And the other people's money, maybe. Or maybe the children's money. We Chinese love to save money.
Put simply, Americans spend, while Chinese consumers save, which probably explains why I'm so cheap. It is a completely different economic culture. And here's where the real chaos starts. The Chinese factories that have lost large amounts of US business are now scrambling to shift towards domestic sales, but the demand just isn't there to absorb the losses. And when you look at the chain reaction this sets off, you'll understand why so many Chinese businesses are now in a state of panic.
这个关税加上去之后
I run a small factory and don't deal with foreign trade, so I'm not sure how much it would affect me. But I've noticed that my upstream suppliers who export raw materials haven't received any orders for a long time. Not even one container is shipped out. When they can't get orders, they try to switch to domestic sales. Now, people at their factories are still working nonstop, running around to try to make domestic sales, so when they get involved in the domestic market, doesn't that drag the domestic factories into it too? Everyone's getting caught in the spiral, and in the end, we'll all collapse together. So yes, these tariffs are definitely hurting Chinese manufacturing in a big way, and as an importer, I am seeing it firsthand. Container prices are at all-time lows. Factory workers are being sent home on extended vacations, orders are piling up, inventory is piling up. And as desperation sets in, factories are starting to take extreme and sometimes reckless measures just to stay alive.
这两天美国关税战一打，
All the goods in the warehouse are marked as return exports, sold directly at just 1 yuan per kilogram. Hey fellow business owners, have you ever heard of selling small home appliances by weight? Is this crazy? This market is selling denim shorts for just 2.5 yuan and regular shorts for 1.55 yuan. What's going on? By the way, that's about 34 cents for a pair of pants. And here's the thing. Many Chinese factories, especially in regions like Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Jiangsu, rely heavily on US orders. Even if the national impact looks small, for these export-dependent suppliers, the US can represent 50 to 80% of their revenue. So when a 145% tariff hits, or when US orders drop by 50%, it can instantly destroy their margins or wipe out their business entirely. And here's what most people don't realize about the average Chinese factory. They're already operating on razor-thin profit margins, and we're talking single digits, especially in crowded industries like textiles, electronics, and toys. And when those margins disappear, so does the entire foundation of China's manufacturing machine. A tariff that forces them to lower prices just to stay competitive, they just can't do it without losing money. And it gets worse. All the machinery in these factories, the looms, the embroidery machines, the printing presses, they're expensive. They need to stay running constantly just for the factory to break even. Most of these manufacturers are already locked in a race to the bottom. They simply can't afford to take another hit. And the signs of desperation are everywhere. If you spent any time on TikTok lately, you've probably seen Chinese factories openly exposing how luxury brands are overpricing their goods and then dropping links where you can buy knockoffs for a fraction of the price. Now, first off, I have no idea how they're getting away with this. You can literally buy a Louis Vuitton or a Birkin knockoff directly through TikTok Shop. But what's even funnier is that a famous leather worker named Tanner watched some of these Chinese videos and pointed out several outright lies about how the products are made.
And this might surprise you, but his cost estimate is too high. And there are other inaccuracies in his original video, listing the materials and the cost of it. And he shows a leather that says Togo. But the leather there, this leather, is not Togo.
Now, I honestly don't know what the end game was with these videos, because all they really did was piss off every major luxury bag maker on the planet. Basically, China is broadcasting to the world, if you manufacture in our factories, your intellectual property is not safe, and we're going to copy you. Now, of course, this has already been happening for years, just not as blatantly as right now. In the meantime, US sellers aren't sitting still. I run a small community of e-commerce sellers, and the main topic of discussion lately is tariff mitigation and reducing our reliance on China suppliers. Not because it's trendy, not because it's easy, but because we have no choice if we want to survive. By the way, if you're interested in learning how to sell online and navigate these tariffs, make sure you sign up for my free 6-day e-commerce mini course below. It's 100% free, and I guarantee you'll learn a lot. Places like Vietnam, India, Mexico, and even parts of Southeast Asia are seeing a surge in new factories, especially set up to serve American demand, and big brands are leading the charge. Take Apple, for example. They've already shifted a significant portion of iPhone production to India. And by 2026, Apple plans to make the majority of the iPhones outside of China. And when a brand like Apple moves, they're not just one company. They're the first domino, and once they fall, the rest will follow. And it's not just tech either. Furniture makers, textile companies, electronic brands like Nike, Adidas, and Hasbro, they're all hedging their bets, setting up operations in Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and Mexico. It's not just about tariffs anymore, it's about risk management. Nobody wants to get caught in the middle of a political firestorm. Nobody wants to deal with sudden export controls, supply chain lockdowns, or new tariffs popping up overnight. The companies that are moving now, the ones diversifying their supply chains early, are going to be the ones that survive and thrive in the next decade. And here's where things get even scarier for China. It's not just about exports. It's about confidence. And right now, Chinese business and consumer confidence is at an all-time low. Youth unemployment. Official numbers say it's around 15 to 20%, but the real number could be even higher because they stopped measuring. There are entire classes of college graduates who can't find jobs and aren't even bothering to look anymore. The yuan is under serious pressure too. Capital is flowing out of the country. Foreign direct investment into China has dropped to levels we haven't seen in decades. Real estate, a key driver of GDP, is in a deep crisis. Even Chinese companies are trying to move their money offshore. Because once confidence breaks, it's not just about the economy slowing down, it's about the system itself becoming unstable. Meanwhile, the Chinese government is doubling down on strategic isolation, tightening controls, locking down data, banning foreign firms from certain sectors. Which might feel like strength in the short term, but in reality, it's pushing away exactly the investment and innovation China needs to grow. So when you zoom out, you don't just see an export slowdown. You see a slow motion collapse in confidence. And once that spiral starts, it's very hard to stop. Now, just to be clear, China isn't going to collapse the way most people imagine. Collapse doesn't always mean a Hollywood-style crash or a sudden implosion. For China, it could look more like years of stagnation, like Japan in the 90s. Social unrest fueled by layoffs, lost opportunities, and rising inequality. A slow erosion of global influence as businesses, investors, and governments quietly move away. That's what analysts really mean when they talk about China collapsing. Not an explosion, but a long, grinding slide into economic anemia. Now, it wouldn't be fair if I didn't talk about what's happening here in the US too. Small sellers who rely on China are definitely hurting, and hurting big time. And the hard truth is, for many businesses, there's no easy way out. Here's a TikTok from a small brand I follow where they explain how they can only make their products in China, and moving production simply isn't an option for them right now.
As a founder, I had to lay off a big portion of my staff. Every factory that we talked to turned us down. They say, oh, your product's too hard to make. It's too complicated. We've never done it before, so we're not going to do it. So we were forced to look elsewhere. And that's why our costs are already high to begin with. And these tariffs make it almost impossible.
The reality is, moving production takes years, not months. Countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India all have capacity issues. They simply can't absorb the massive volume that China handles today. And for many critical products, especially electronics, we're still heavily dependent on Chinese infrastructure. Ports, trucking, raw material supply chains. If China becomes too expensive, there is no quick fix. Costs will rise across the board, and that fuels even more inflation here in the US. At the same time, China is starting to weaponize its control over rare earth elements, materials that we need to make everything from smartphones to military equipment. It's all turning into one big game of chicken, and both sides are going to take hits. The real question is, who can hold out longer? Now, I've tried to give you just the facts and data that I've gathered, and use it however you see fit, and let me know what you think in the comments. But personally, here's where I stand. I believe the US has the edge, because while we may have painful choices to make, China cannot easily replace demand from a country that consumes 30% of the world's personal consumption. And as a seller myself, we have options to look for suppliers elsewhere. Now that you understand what's going on in China, make sure you watch this video here on what I believe is Trump's master plan to bring manufacturing back to the United States.